Well, happy February, everyone. Josh's severe weather. We are now in the final third of meteorological winter, and this month looks like it's going to be very interesting. Now, those of us down south that had some brutal cold, some rare snow back in January are now beginning to feel the beginning touches of spring. But interestingly, we may revert back to winter at some point here back in February. Especially from the Gulf Coast region on northward, maybe not so much Florida and South Texas. But things are about to change on a dime here as we get into a much more active pattern. And we may go out with a bang here this winter. So I appreciate you joining me here on this first day of February. I hope everybody's had a great weekend. We are going to talk mainly longer range here. I'm not going to get into what's going to happen tonight and tomorrow. There's not a whole lot to talk about there, but we are going to see multiple storm systems moving on to the West Coast. And the Pacific Northwest first will be dealing with some heavy coastal rain and heavy snow, even some snow in Seattle and Portland. And then we're going to see that marching across the plains into the Northeast. And that's not going to be it here. Multiple storms to track over the coming days. So let me share my screen with you all, and we're going to talk about what's going on across the tropics in the world first. Then we're going to get to the U.S. here. And you can see, obviously, a couple of storms in the Indian Ocean we've been tracking. One is 11S, the other was Elvis. And as we move this along, you can see, ladies and gentlemen, Elvis has left the building. I cannot contain myself. But yes, moving away from Madagascar. And now, as we head to today, you can see we do have a threat for Madagascar as this system will be making its way towards the north coast over the next couple of days. Some heavy rain mostly, not really a big wind maker. There's another cyclone here that has a decent chance of becoming what would be equivalent to a hurricane over the southern Indian Ocean. And we're going to watch a few other systems affecting New Caledonia, Northeast Australia, and areas to the south of Malaysia and Indonesia. But all is pretty quiet here across the remainder of the Pacific and the Atlantic as we have storm after storm tracking through. This one storm that affected Hawaii with blizzard conditions on the peaks is taking aim at California. And you can see the atmospheric river here coming in off the Pacific. That is going to lead to some pretty big rains and heavier snow as we get farther inland. That is the next storm to track. You can see on the East Coast, we have our major storm from last week. Fortunately, it didn't do a whole lot of severe weather compared to what maybe it could have been. Things didn't quite line up all the way, but I will say this. When I went to bed Thursday night, I did not expect to be woken up by thunder and lightning at 3:30 in the morning in Raleigh, and we didn't even get a drop of rain. But things have been a little bit interesting here, and that storm is going to march across the Atlantic and head towards Europe, where we're going to continue to see some active weather. Now, looking at the U.S. temperatures today, you can see a lot of the country is at or above average. There are obviously exceptions. You can see northern New England, northern Michigan, single digit temperatures this afternoon. Pretty darn cold, but not so bad once we get down to about the Mason-Dixon line in the Ohio River. And we're still well above average across the plains, the southeast at and above average. And we are going to continue to see this mild air making its way northward, but only to a certain extent. By the time we see colder air coming down from Canada, you see this cold here? It's not just going to retreat and be gone for the rest of the month. It is coming back in waves. We are going to see more back and forth here versus last month where we just saw the forth, not the back. So as we look at the satellite image, you can see this next storm taking aim here at California. A lot of cloud cover moving inland here into the Rockies and northern plains. You can see the cold air here, these blue colors indicating not cloud cover, but very cold surface temperatures. This is the infrared measuring the temperature of whatever it sees. And in this case, it's snowpack over Canada. And so that continues to reinforce the cold over New England. Now, in the south, we're not touching any of that. We're continuing to stay fairly mild here, just some cloud deck moving from the Gulf across central Florida and off the Atlantic coastline. And as a result, it's about as quiet as a map as we've seen in about a month over the eastern and southern United States. No lake effect really to talk about today. We do have some areas that did get a lot of rain, so we do have to be careful with some river flooding, in particular across Arkansas, but even into parts of Kentucky and southwestern Virginia. There was a lot of rain over recent days. But the next storm is what we're tracking next. And you can see green indicates an area that's under a flood watch, including the Bay Area, almost to Pebble Beach, and right up into the Northern Valley of California. We have winter storm warnings in pink over the Cascades, over the Sierra Nevada, and also even into some of the coastal ranges like the Siskiyou here. And we also see those across the northern Rocky Mountain range as well. Some high winds expected as the storm plows in to Montana, Wyoming, and northern parts of Nevada. And with the cold coming down up and over this ridge, we are going to still have some winter weather to deal with here around Duluth and across the Arrowhead of Minnesota and even northwestern parts of Wisconsin, including the Keweenaw of Michigan. I guess that's not Wisconsin, but I know I kind of lumped the two together. So quiet in the east for now, but major snow impacts coming over the next couple of days, in particular in interior parts of Northern California and Southern Oregon. But eventually that shifts into mountains of Idaho, into Wyoming, the Teton Range as well. And we are going to see impacts over the next few days, tracking across the northern portion of the country. But all in all, this is so much of a shift north from what we saw just a week and a half ago, where the southern United States was completely shut down, at least the Gulf region was. Now you can see there is nothing to the south of Interstate 80 really to talk about at this point, aside from the mountains. So as far as rain goes, we are going to be watching as we get into the end of the weekend, some heavy rain potential across Northern California. And early next week, that will eventually come to an end as this system moves inland. This is the European model from Pivotal Weather. And I will show it to you here real quick. We're not going to get super specific in this video. I do want to keep it shorter, but you can see cold, dry air in the northeast, clipper system across the north central states that will affect parts of the northeast at the end of the weekend into early Monday. But the big system is the one moving into California. You see this flow of moisture onshore. Green indicates heavy rain. The yellow indicates very heavy rain. Blue is snow. And pink indicates a wintry mix, depending on the elevation. The model can't quite pick it out this far out. But that's a big atmospheric river that's coming into northern Cal, and it's going to continue to streak inland and move south down the coast. So by Tuesday, we'll see rain moving into Big Sur, and even by Tuesday evening and Wednesday morning down into the LA basin. And that's obviously what is needed in Los Angeles. Now, some of that rain could be on the heavy side. We have to be mindful of the potential for more mudslides like we saw here about a week or so ago. But overall, and not to discount what's gone on there, but overall, this is very necessary to start to bring us out of this deficit of rain that we've had. Obviously, there's though going to be some flood potential with it. That system by Wednesday moves into the central U.S. With the cold air at the surface and this moisture running up and over it, there is going to be ice potential, unfortunately, around the Great Lakes region. There'll be some rain and maybe heavy rain potential around the Ohio Valley. We're looking Wednesday into early Thursday. And this could be a significant snowfall for the far northern portion of the country over into the northern Great Lakes and eventually into New England and Atlantic Canada later on Thursday. And behind this system, it gets colder for next weekend. And we continue this parade of storms from California right across Colorado into the Ohio Valley, Great Lakes, and then cutting up into eastern Canada. And obviously, where the warm air cuts up, we are going to see more rain than snow, and that would include most of Ohio, western PA, and West Virginia. But there will be wraparound that sends colder air in the form of clouds and snow flurries. That's something we're pretty much used to at this point. Now, as we get into that second full week of February, leading up to Valentine's Day at the end of the week, the storm track does start to shift south. We see more invasions of cold, and I'm going to break down kind of what that looks like here. This is just one model, so don't get too caught up in what it's showing, but it does show that progression farther to the south across places like St. Louis, KC, Chicago, and Detroit, maybe Omaha, which really is not yet to really see much snow. We see this progression southward here for the second week of February. So there is definitely potential for some winter mischief, but at this point, the details are still to be determined. And you can see more cold comes down here through the middle of the month of February and maybe even beyond. Looking at the Pac Northwest, we will see some snow in Seattle and Tacoma, not much. Obviously, a lot more in the mountains to your east. Portland will see about an inch or so of snow as well. So this will be our first winter storm in the lower elevations that we've really seen this winter. And looking at Oregon, you can see all the way down to Eugene, a little bit of accumulating snow. Bend will see some accumulating snow, especially in the mountains to your west. And in California, that's where the amounts are going to be highest, northern Cal, where the NAM model is outputting maybe as much as 64 inches of fresh powder across portions of the Sierra Nevada. Pretty snowy as well, close to Tahoe, where up to a foot could fall, maybe more in the higher elevations. So this will be a pretty significant storm. And after we wrapped up the month of January at our coldest since 1988, the country as a whole was 3 degrees Fahrenheit below average. When have we seen a January like that? Well, it's been a while, that's for certain. We've got to go back to maybe 2010, 2011, but really 1988. The thing that's going to change is that we are already off to a warm start here for the month of February. Now, as we look at the stratosphere, now this is the atmosphere way up at 10 millibars. We're talking 90, 100, 110,000 feet up. What we like to see is where the polar vortex shapes up, where the cold air comes from. And you can see over the next few days, we have no invasion of real fresh cold coming to the United States. But as we get later into the second and third week, there's a piece of the polar vortex that looks like it's going to stretch its way back down again and maybe take aim at the central and eastern United States. And you can see that when you've got this big area of higher than average temperatures and heights at 10 millibars across Alaska. What that typically will allow to happen is that the cold is going to go around the Rockies and come down into the central and eastern United States. So the details on this are uncertain, but you can see here multiple pieces of cold progressing farther to the south. And it's going to look a little bit more like it did here early in January, where that cold comes down here in favor. So we are definitely going to be looking for this. And it may come at a weird time where we go through a couple weeks of February where it's actually pretty mild for a lot of the country. And then it turns a lot colder again. I like to look at what's called the Madden-Julian oscillation. This is the interseasonal variability. It's a belt that goes around the tropical latitudes. And we were definitely in a wintry start here in phases 8, 1, and 2 here in the middle of January. Then we came into some warmer phases here over the last few days. We are now moving up into phase 6, which is pretty mild for the southern and eastern United States. But you can see there is going to be a move back into some colder phases here, allowing more cold to come down. And it will start in the western United States here this upcoming week, and then eventually find its way into the central and eastern United States. And the timeline on that, a little bit uncertain as far as the exact date, but we're probably narrowing it down to about the middle of February, maybe even the second half of February. It's only 4 weeks long, and it's very possible that after a warm December, a cold January, and a warm start to February, we go right back to cold. So I hope you all like amusement parks, because this is definitely a roller coaster, to say the least. Here's the Arctic oscillation from the European ensemble. What this shows is that the polar vortex is not stretched into the United States and North America for the moment. We do have cold air coming down, but it's not a large scale amount of cold. But that is going to change as we go into a negative phase here after about the 8th or 9th of the month of February. So about next weekend, give or take. And then we're in a negative phase throughout that entire second full week and maybe even the third full week of the month. Not just the Arctic oscillation, we're watching the EPO. The negative EPO indicates ridging over the Pacific and troughing across the central and eastern United States, meaning the cold comes down through those troughs of air. The NAO goes negative as well. This allows colder air to come down into the eastern United States, especially the Northeast and eastern Canada. The NAO is typically a block of high pressure over the Greenland region, and that allows cold to come in and get trapped behind it. So this is pretty negative when we get beyond the 10th or so of February, right through the 20th, give or take. The PNA, though, is not positive. It's negative, meaning the southeastern United States, the southern U.S., probably won't see a big linkage to where we can see wintry weather, not a major storm like a few weeks ago, really even just earlier last week. Instead, we see storms that come through with some rain, maybe severe weather, then shots of cold behind them, then back to warm and mild. And it's a lot more back and forth when the PNA is negative. And yes, the control tries to make it positive at the middle of the month, but that, again, is not supported by the rest of what the ensembles are showing us. So as we look at the upper air chart, we can see the cold that is moving into the western United States here early next week. There's shots that come down into Atlantic Canada, but overall, a pretty decent sized ridge in place over the central and eastern United States. Now, just because there's a ridge doesn't mean we won't have winter weather. In fact, as the ridge flattens out and we see pieces of energy come up and over it, this actually sets up a pretty good shot of moisture from the Pacific to track across the northern United States. What it means is the south will not see a whole lot of rain. The north will see quite a bit of storminess. In between is going to be very interesting around the Ohio Valley and into the mid-Missouri Valley. And then as it turns colder here around the 10th, you can see there will be more substantial cold across the western United States. And this is actually a pretty favorable setup for winter storms to make their way into the Northeast. Despite the ridge that we see offshore, there's a big trough in the west, and that's going to send systems across the country. Now, it's going to have to get colder to really see a big storm on the East Coast, but this certainly can mean heavy snow for the interior of the Northeast, for the Ohio Valley and Great Lakes, especially the northern Ohio Valley, maybe not so much Kentucky and Tennessee. And as we move this on towards about Valentine's Day, you see it's a lot of back and forth at this point. And this is just a mean, but definitely our ridge is breaking down on the eastern United States here after the 16th. So the cold does have a way to make its way eastward, and it may get to a point where enough cold is here, enough moisture is coming up where something maybe more significant could happen for the big cities of the Northeast towards the second portion of February, maybe even early March. If we look at temperature anomalies, you will see the cold is certainly in place over the Northwest, and it finds its way here around Valentine's Day into President's Day weekend into the Northeast. Seems like February as a whole is typically the snowiest month for places like Boston and New York and Philadelphia. And a lot of that has to do with where the jet stream is positioned and the fact that the ocean waters still take some time to cool down and don't get to their coldest until later February, early March. And when that happens, we definitely see more of a temperature gradient along the coast, meaning stronger low pressure systems that come up. So the fact that it's colder than average for a week or two over the middle and second portion of February certainly favors something that could not just be an East Coast rainstorm, but maybe a significant snowstorm. And it even stays chilly into the beginning of March here. So we definitely have some potential still, even at the beginning of March, for something wintry to happen up the East Coast. Here's a look at the upper level temperatures. And you can see very back and forth here, but definitely cold by the 10th in the east, then warming up around the 14th, then turning colder again. And this is just kind of back and forth, and it's one run of the GFS. So again, you can see there's definitely some extreme showing up, but trying to time out each one of these little air masses is going to be the biggest challenge over the next month. We'll take a look at the temperature anomalies at the surface, and you can see the warmth on the GFS is certainly trying to show its muscles, but the cold comes back here, and it's a little bit later than the European. The GFS says it's going to be after President's Day is when it gets colder over the plains first and then the eastern U.S., whereas the European has that about a week sooner. So we're looking at second, third, maybe fourth week of February. But again, time frame and exact pinpoint details are still to be determined on that. Here's a look at rain anomalies. You could see over the next week, very wet across California, actually dry over Western Canada. So this is the atmospheric river we've been talking about. And Southern Cal is going to get a fair amount of rain before things turn back to average. Then we may see some more decent amount of precipitation as we end the month of February and head into March in the Pac Northwest. This is not great over Southern Cal, but again, this could still change. As we look towards the central part of the country here, you're going to see that the southern U.S., for the most part, is going to be drier than average, but we are going to see an active storm pattern setting up from North Texas over to the Tennessee Valley and the Ohio Valley. Now, some of this could be snow, maybe not all the way to Alabama and Mississippi, but certainly the northern portion of this region could be in for a pretty active setup here. And you can see it stays active until we get to the very end of the month of February. And at this time of the year, it can be back and forth anyway. So overall, we don't see a great concern for a major blockbuster blizzard in the north central states, but we certainly could still have substantial systems tracking across Utah, New Mexico, Colorado, and eventually finding their way into this area. And certainly down here, we've got to be mindful of the potential threat for ongoing heavy amounts of rain and maybe even severe weather as we get through the month of February. And finally, I want to take it to the eastern United States here. Cuts off South Florida, interestingly, but I will say this. This is definitely an active look here across the mid-Atlantic and Northeast. This is over the next week, and it actually gets wetter for the second to third weeks of February. So East Coast storm system, certainly a possibility here. Obviously, our certainty level drops when we get into March and April, but this is definitely still promising for those of you holding out for a big snowstorm, places like Philly, New York, Boston, Providence, and Hartford. So we're just going to have to track each individual storm and see exactly how it works out. Here's a blend of the models showing snowfall. Here's the next couple of days, big in the Northwest. We've got some coming into the East. Here's another system behind it on Tuesday in the Northeast. Get a little bit of a break. And then later next week, we have a more substantial storm, but it's pretty far north. And then as we get to next weekend and beyond, you can see the storm track starts to drop south a little bit farther. And we're getting into that potential for something maybe next weekend and into the following week a little farther south. And now we start to see things showing up again in Kansas and Nebraska, Missouri, and Iowa right around the Super Bowl and then right beyond into the second full week of the month of February. Ice potential is also there, especially in the interior Northeast, but also around the Great Lakes here. We're mainly looking at the middle of the week and especially later in the week across this area. And yes, it does show some potential farther south down with time. We'll have to wait and see how that works out. But we may not be completely done with freezing rain in places like Arkansas, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Virginia either, but not over the next week. And then finally, taking a look at snow. Again, we're watching the trends here. You see things coming farther south around the 12th and 13th of February, and still decent chances across this area right through the middle of the month of February. And then the European says, despite the cold, most of our storm action is going to be in the Northwest at the end of the month of February. But this doesn't mean something couldn't happen around the Great Lakes or Northeast. It's just saying the better chance is going to be before then. So we're going to have to wait and see about that. And again, don't take this forecast too literally. Just want to show you where things are going to set up. But over the next 46 days, you can see pretty decent amounts of snow in our ski areas of the West. Moving into the central part of the country, it's a little bit more promising in Omaha and Iowa. I know we haven't gotten much at all, but the model average shows that there's definitely more potential for that to happen. Not so good when we get down to Texas and the Gulf region. And then in the eastern US, this is definitely pretty good potential for New England, but even the rest of the Northeast, this is better than what we've seen for a while. So will it happen on the 18th of March? Probably not. I think a lot of this is February, maybe the first week of March, but certainly something we're going to be tracking for you in the coming weeks. So that's all I've got for y'all today. I hope everybody has a great weekend. I'll be back on Monday. Then I've got to go to California for work, actually San Diego. I've never been out there, so I'm excited about that. But I feel like January felt like it was about 1,000 days long. It just took forever. It was so much work, so much going on. New year. You may certainly relate to that. And it was certainly one that caused me and my family to be weary with everything going on with the winter weather, with the travel, with my wife's things going on, with sicknesses, all of that. So obviously, we have to look past it and move forward. And as a Christian, I have faith in what I do that I'm going to reach somebody today that came here because they were led here today and needed to hear this one message I wanted to share with you. And that is from the book of Galatians 6:9, New King James Version. And let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. And that is the good news that we've been given through the gospel, that putting in the work, putting in all the work is going to lead to a fruitful harvest. We will reap if we sow. And you may be struggling with reaping right now, but if you continue to sow, you will reap. And we know that because that is what God has promised us. That is what's already been done for us through the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. I wanted to share that wonderful news with you today because even though I'm a meteorologist, I'm first and foremost a Christian and a follower of Christ. And I truly believe that. And I really hope that that is something that um, you can take to heart and understand. And even if you're not a follower of Christ like I am, I won't judge you on that. I think everybody here is welcome to their own opinion. I will say this, though, putting in the work now leads to a fruitful harvest. You just have to have some faith in doing it, just continuing to put in that effort. So don't be discouraged. It's just 1 month into the year. We've got a lot of time here, but our time on earth is numbered. So hope you all have a wonderful weekend. I appreciate you as always. And if you didn't subscribe yet, I encourage you to do so and come back here on Monday with our next video. Hope you all have a great weekend. Take care.